Hello and welcome to today's lecture. In today's lecture I'm going to be discussing tips to improve your confidence when you're giving a speech publicly. Right, there is no shortcut to this. You have to practice to improve your public speaking skills in general, and it's the same for confidence. You need to practice and get comfortable being uncomfortable. But there are some suggestions that I have which should help. What I would know is I would generally warn against doing lots of public speeches if you're not confident, because chances are, if you're not confident, you'll do really badly, or at the very least think you did really badly. So what will happen normally is you'll get into a state of almost learned helplessness, where every time you do a speech publicly, you'll feel awful about yourself and not want to do it, and then you'll put off trying to improve your skills and your confidence. So for building confidence, I recommend that you practice and start easy. And I'm going to go into what that means. Make regular speeches to yourself. Most people are relatively confident talking to themselves. Obviously, don't do this in public or they might think you're a nutter. I mean, to be fair, most people think I'm a nutter because sometimes I will give speeches to myself while I'm walking down the street. Not that loudly, but I'll go through it in my head. Before I do a mooting competition or a debating competition, that's what I do. But there's no reason why you can't write a speech for yourself, deliver it, and maybe record it so you can listen back to it later. And once you do that a few times, you should be able to give a speech to a small number of people. So if you can give a speech to a small number of people, you should be able to then move on to larger groups of people. This tip is slightly different. Talk more in social interactions. What you should do is you should talk to people. A lot of people who struggle with public speaking aren't very confident talking to people. So there's someone I know who I've tutored. In their social interactions, they talk hardly ever. So I think that's a good place to start. So if you're talking to people and you're saying yes and just asking questions and just listening to people, that can be very good as long as it's proportionate. If you're never talking and telling people about yourself, that's not very good for you and your confidence level. So what I would suggest is you start talking to people more and tell stories more when you're in a conversation. So if you're at the pub with your friends and they ask you what you've been doing, don't give a one-word answer. Explain. So someone asked me the other day what had I been doing at the weekend. So I explained. I said on Saturday I went climbing, and then after I went climbing I went for lunch, and then I went ice skating, and try and add detail to that. So instead of just saying I went climbing, I went ice skating, say I went ice climbing at this place, and then I had lunch at this restaurant called The Bank. It was lovely, the food was brilliant, it was relatively cheap, I had a steak pie which was to die for, and then move on from there. Add detail. So the more detail you add when you're telling a story, you might struggle and stutter a bit, but that's fine. The more questions people will probably ask you, and the more you'll be in the hot seat. That's another thing which I forgot to put in the slides, but answering questions is generally a good place to start with making a speech. So if you can answer questions in front of people, that's normally easier than writing and delivering a speech, because a question, you've got something to work on, and normally the person asking the questions will prompt you. So asking questions, talking more in conversations is generally a good way to improve your public speaking skills. Start small. I've already discussed the advantages of starting small, but I'm going to go into more detail about specifically what I recommend you do. This will be a step-by-step guide, however it's not going to work for everybody. If you're someone who really struggles socially and really struggles giving speeches and presentations as a result, I understand that finding friends or finding people to talk to can be difficult. So I'm just going to suggest some places that might be decent. If you really, really struggle talking to people and having a conversation with someone, or just talking to people or something like that, I recommend you start with shop assistants, empty pubs, and just start a general conversation. I actually did this with my Chinese flatmate last year. His English wasn't very good, or at the very least his spoken English wasn't very good. So what we did was we made him order all our drinks whenever we went out. We also made him talk to the cashiers. So when we were looking for something at the supermarket, I'd say, right, there's a shop assistant over there. Go and ask them where the butcher counter is, or go and ask them where the 100% pork sausages are. And if that's how bad you are and you really struggle talking to people, that's a good place to start. By just talking to people who, for some extent, or to some extent, it's their job to talk to you. Because then you're not going to make that many mistakes. Or the mistakes you do make aren't going to affect your confidence. So a good line, I would say, is if you're going to an empty pub or something and the bartender's not busy, maybe ask him to suggest a drink or some food. If the bartender's bad, they might say, I don't know, what do you like? But even then, you can say, well, I like fish. Have you got any fish dishes? And move on from there. What I'd also recommend as a step above that is talk to someone on the bus, on public transport. If you struggle talking to people, and the reason you struggle with public speaking is struggling to talk to people. Generally, as a rule for this, avoid people who wear headphones. But even then, you can, when you're putting your stuff down or sitting somewhere, say, do you mind if I sit there? And then they'll either say no or yes. And then you'll have their attention, so you can ask them questions, give them a compliment or something like that, and you can hopefully try and build a conversation from there. Step 3 is, after you've spoken to people when it's appropriate to, if you have no friends, because this advice is, I'm assuming you have no friends, is start thinking about making friends. So go to social activities, choose random ones. If you don't really like sport, go into something like a board game society. If you're at university, there'll be loads of things like that. But there'll be other things to do as well, even if you're not at uni. So there could be a chess club. If you don't know how to play chess and you'd want to learn, give it a go and talk to people there. Once you've started to try and make friends, talk more in your social interactions. That's probably step 4. And once you start to talk more and you become more comfortable talking to people, hopefully your public speaking skills should improve naturally. But I don't see the harm, once you're confident talking to people, you trying to make speeches to yourself, maybe record them so you can listen back to them. I recommend people record and listen back to speeches anyway, especially if they're unsure on how to write them, or if you want, you can email a speech to me, or we can do a stream where we go through your speeches. Because if someone wants some private help, I generally prefer to be on a live stream, because normally the problems people have speaking publicly are relatively similar to each other. So if anyone is struggling with something in particular, or wants me to look over a speech, I'd rather do it on a live stream. But I do understand that takes a lot of confidence, because no one likes to be criticised, certainly not publicly. But I like to think I'm quite a nice person and quite good at giving feedback constructively. So we're on step 5 or 6, I forget which one. You've got some friends or people you regularly socialise with, and you're giving a speech, or you want to give a speech at work, or you've got to give a speech at work. What I would suggest you do is that you start writing speeches and just trying to read poetry, plays and that type of thing, because that's normally a good place to start. Sorry guys, that's my flatmates. But when you're starting to write speeches on a regular basis, I recommend you look at poetry, speeches, and that type of thing, because how you speak and how you write is normally quite different. Poetry and plays is a very good way of getting inspiration from speeches that are meant to be written, or content and literature that is meant to be spoken. So read speeches, read poetry, and then you should find it easier to write them. And if you've written a good speech and you're proud of it, your confidence will go up. Another thing that's just come into my head just now is, in terms of public speaking and in terms of improving your public speaking skills by improving your confidence, get used to people looking at you. I know this is going to sound quite weird, but sometimes I've seen this be done in documentary, and I can't remember which one. I saw this person who was teaching people with confidence issues to get out and about, and what they do is they get their clients to dress wearing something weirdly that will attract attention. For example, I have some red shoes, they're lovely, but if you're not that confident of a person, try doing activities like that. Dress flamboyantly, just to get used to people looking at you. Maybe some people will tease you, but I'd only recommend you do something like this if your confidence has been improving, and go into it expecting a negative response. But if you get used to experiencing negative responses and public attention or attention from random people, you should hopefully improve and get used to it. Another thing that I recommend is do a dangerous hobby or face your fears. If you're scared of heights, go coasteering. And once you've overcome your fear of heights, normally what I've noticed with clients is it's easier to overcome your public speaking issue or your issue with confidence, because if you're practicing things and doing things that you wouldn't normally do, or it's a stretch for you to do, your confidence and self-esteem will naturally improve. Thank you very much for watching. Your homework for this lecture, well, there's not really any homework, but if you're having trouble writing a speech or anything like that, actually no, there is homework. Try the things that I've suggested. You don't have to share it with me. Probably please don't, because there are probably too many of you, but thank you very much. I'd recommend you try some of the stuff, because even if you're a relatively confident person and you're just here for technique, give it a go. See if it helps you. Thank you very much, and goodbye.